Chapter 8 today, and as it says on the board there, we may even get into Chapter 9 a little bit. Chapter 9, to some degree, rehashes Chapter 2. The authors, I tend to agree with them, authors of the book, see the international trade issue as so telling of general concepts that it's worth introducing in Chapter 2 and then rehashing some of it in Chapter 9 and then expanding upon that some through the supply and demand model. The supply and demand model, that one. Well, let's start here. And I know we probably went over this slide already, but it's an important slide to discuss because, see, when we don't use the price system to allocate things, we just create pure waste. You know, the term waste is overused by economists because most things, like if somebody floods their lawn or something, oh, that's so wasteful. No, it isn't wasteful. They're economizing on their time. Yeah, like with a sprinkler system or something, watering their lawn on a rainy day like today. But in this case, allocating goods and services according to willingness to wait in line is just pure waste because it doesn't provide any motivations that are positive on the production side to provide more of it. As you know from our previous discussion, if anything, it provides motivation to provide less. Yeah, because quality is diminished because they can still sell it, right? Of course, not quality diminished to zero, but quality erodes because it's a way to save on producing the product, okay, and an indirect way to raise the price, okay, and they'll still sell as much at the allowed price as before. Okay? Now, some people prefer as individuals to have the good allocated by spending time waiting in line because maybe their time costs are low or because they have some advantage in getting to the front of the line. Okay, now also think about the waiting in line way to get something. And I know it's hard to think about that because we're lucky that doesn't happen very often. Other places in the world, the former Soviet Union, that was just standard operating procedure. People would stand in the Russian winter and minus 20 degrees outside during the dark of night to get in line for something, and many of them wouldn't end up with anything. Right? They'd get in line a little bit too late, and by the time their turn came to the front of the line, it's pull the pockets out. Sorry, it's all sold out. A couple slides down, we'll talk about command economies, the example of the former Soviet Union. Okay, so a bribe or an additional payment, a scalper is sort of somebody being bribed, right? Okay, that's not an official price control. That's just where the seller sets the price below the market clearing level. It's the same basic idea, right? With a bribe, instead of paying a scalper to stand in line for you, with a bribe, you can induce somebody that managed to get the good or that still has some to provide it to you rather than somebody else. It's just another way to compete. There will be competition. It's just a question of how or in what form. Of course, competition that's illegal is corrosive to the way our society functions and the rule of law and a lot of other important things. So just saying, oh, well, let them compete some other way is probably not acceptable because illegal forms of competition are corrosive to the rule of law and honesty and respect for the law, among other things. All right, so here's the model. Remember, economists do it with models. And so your task is to really immerse yourself in this. And so let's take this model and kind of back up a little bit and do some of the due diligence that some of you didn't take seriously enough the first 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 times that I suggested to do that. All right, let's just sort of dismantle this graph, although it's not a perfect graph for dismantling. But if you take the y-axis, okay, that's not total spending. That's not a lot of other things that you might have imagined. That's the price per unit. It says price up there, but it's also other things. Okay, even though the word price is there, it kind of glosses over things because if you look at the supply line, the supply line is an indication of opportunity cost at the margin. Okay, so for example, a place where the supply and demand intersect, the number, okay, if there was one up on the graph, that number would tell you the additional cost. Let me go ahead and draw one up on the graph. I'm a graph up on the board so I can have one to to work with. By the way, notice that up on the board here, because there's hardly any chalk, we have what is called a common property resource problem. I mentioned that last time with respect to living arrangements. It's the same basic idea. So now I brought some private chalk to eliminate that problem. It's hard to find any chalk in here because people don't want to bring their own usually, leave it here because then somebody else will use it up. It's kind of like putting your, if you're a rancher and you have a pasture that you share with others, maybe because you lease it from the government, you don't want to leave any grass behind because that won't save the grass. That just means somebody else will eat it. Right? So that's another one of those common property resource problems. Okay, so let's provide a little better graph than this one for doing some of the due diligence that we need to do. Okay, so one of the points that I wish was on this graph that I'm going to put up here is, let's say this number is 74. I don't know why that number popped into my head, but there it is. Okay, and the supply, that's not the amount that exists. That's one of the I thought you meant that students get in their head. That's the amount offered for sale. And what's the basis of being willing to offer something for sale? Okay, the cost of providing another one. You have to be able to charge at least enough to offset the cost of providing another one. And because opportunity costs differ, let's say this is 10 down here. And let's see, what would that would be? That would be about, let's say 45. Okay, so $10 more units, dollars per ton, tons per some time period, week, day, hour, whatever. Okay, so that means the lowest opportunity cost to produce this product is $10 per ton. But that'll only get you one of them. Okay, to get more than that, the price has to be higher than $10. Okay, any price lower than $10, no market, no production. Okay, and you can't sell it for any more than $74 because that's the highest willingness to pay. Okay, but within that range, there's room for trade. Right, and why trade? Because trade moves things from those with a low opportunity cost to those that have a high willingness to pay. So the gains from trade that we've been talking about. And the gains from trade occur all the way out here to the market equilibrium quantity, the quantity that maximizes the gains from trade, because up to that quantity, the value of the good, which is your demand line, is greater than the opportunity cost of making more. If for some reason we overshoot that, okay, we forego or give back or lose some of those gains from trade. Gains from trade, all of this. If for some reason we fall short of that, which is more common, at least in our discussion so far, let's say for whatever reason there's a price floor at, what does that number look like, about 52? Okay, so let's say there's a price floor at 52, and now the quantity actually purchased is only 35. And from 35 to 44, the additional value is still more than the opportunity cost. We left some gains from trade sitting on the table. Okay, there it is. We leave it there. And so we call that a deadweight loss equal to this amount. Dollars per ton times tons per week means dollars per week lost. Okay? We can get the same result with a price ceiling of, what does that look like, about 30. A price ceiling would produce exactly the same deadweight loss, a price ceiling at $30. Okay, with the price floor at $52, we have wasteful quality enhancements. Wow, that sounds weird. What could be wasteful quality enhancement? Well, the price is higher by more than the quality enhancement is worth. What was proof of that? Because I think I went over this example before. It's always the one that pops into my head. Back when the airlines were regulated, they did some things to make it more attractive for middle-aged businessmen. I guess in the 70s and 60s there weren't nearly as many business women as there are now, so it was mostly businessmen that were traveling at the high fixed prices for airline travel. And so to compete for the limited number of travelers that were willing to pay the high fares, the airlines employed only young female flight attendants. Okay? A quality enhancement for sure. Okay, now, what proved that that was a wasteful quality enhancement? Well, when airlines were deregulated, that went away. Right? The public showed that they preferred the lower fares over the additional, the cost of enhancing quality in that way. All right, so that's what a wasteful quality enhancement means. It means that people aren't willing to pay for it if they could have the money instead, what it costs, but with a price floor, that's not an option. Okay, so this is the quantity demanded at this $52 price floor, and so there's going to be intense competition to sell these 35 units to somebody. And so this area in here, as this graph shows, only it says, let's see, well, that's a graph for a shortage, but this area for a surplus is the value, maximum value of wasteful quality enhancement. If it's for a shortage, a price ceiling at $30, then you have the situation, the graph up on the board, and that is the likely waste of time, the value of wasted time. Again, what do I mean by wasted? Picture this, pour it in the toilet, flush, okay, gone, right? Totally wasted. No, see, whereas a bribe or a payment to a scalper or something, that's just a transfer of resources from one person to another. Okay, now, if you make the payment, sure, it's a loss to you, but it's not a loss to society, and it provides some incentives that are positive for you and everybody else in the long run, namely to make more and to provide it to those willing to pay the most for it. Okay, let's see. Let's double down here on this due diligence thing. Okay, so here's the point on the graph that I was referring to before I got frustrated with the fact that there weren't any numbers up there. What does this point mean here? Okay, yeah, that's the equilibrium point, so we'll call it E. Point E says that the 44th ton per week has an opportunity cost of $45. Okay, the cost of providing this good, 44 units of it instead of 43, is an additional $45. And it can be sold for $45 because point E says that the marginal benefit of the 44th one is $45. In other words, additional value created, a marginal benefit, additional value created to someone is enough to offset the opportunity cost of making it, which is why 44 is it. That's why there more isn't produced. Because for the next one, going past 44, sorry I made the 40s, both of them 40s there, going past point E to the right, additional cost is more than it's worth to someone. That sale will not happen. Right? The seller cannot charge enough to offset their opportunity cost for increasing production to sell that unit. Now, when we create a shortage with a price ceiling, now we have a situation where the willingness to pay is way above the opportunity cost, which is the basis for the deadweight loss, and it's the basis for the willingness to make bribes and the basis for black markets. See, black markets are a response to, hey, this is worth more than it's being sold for. And so black markets are helpful in the sense that they improve efficiency, but they're not good in the sense that they create disrespect for the law and corrupt behavior and mafias and those sorts of things to pull off those kind of things. Okay, any questions, comments so far before we move on? All right. Let's have another little thought about price controls, in particular price ceilings. They're quite common in healthcare around the world. Because you see, when we provide third-party payment of healthcare costs, right, the government or insurance companies, that's what I mean by third-party payment, it seems cheaper, right? At the point of decision-making, it's cheaper, right? Right, because you're not going to be charged as much. Yeah, you're going to pay for it, you and everybody else, through your taxes and your insurance premiums and all of that. But see, those are sunk costs. You're not going to get your taxes back or your insurance premiums back if you don't go to the doctor when you have a situation where there's some benefit from making such a visit. All right, so for equity reasons, we have these third-party payment situations. Equity reasons, poor people can't afford the price of health care. Well, part of the reason they can't afford it is because the price has risen, because the demand has been increased by not making people pay the cost of health care. All right, well, that aside, the third-party payment makes it cheaper to purchase the service. Okay, the additional cost doesn't cover the additional benefit may not be worth the additional cost. Okay, so it creates an inefficient situation. It creates a shortage in some cases because the government says, hey, we can't finance this much additional health care. Okay, in fact, let's just take a quick example. Look at that. Okay, so here's the initial situation, D0 and S0. So this would be some healthcare service. Okay, here's the increased demand with Medicare, Medicaid, insurance companies paying for health care rather than you paying it out of pocket. And so now, at this price, there's a shortage. Okay, so the price, as we know, would go up to here, and the quantity would be higher. Now look at what happens here. Total spending, P0 times Q0, is a lot less than P1 times Q1. See, therein lies the temptation, not just the temptation, the act of saying, okay, right, this increases, wow, we don't want to spend that much through our taxes. We'll just cap the price. It was okay before. Why can't it just stay okay? We'll cap the price at P0. Well, because people want more now that their out-of-pocket cost has been reduced. Okay, so we have this shortage. All right, now, why is this especially important in healthcare? Because what happens when there's a shortage? Got to wait in line for it. You went to the doctor to get help with a medical issue, and they say, well, yeah, you need this operation. We'll put you on the list. What do you mean, doc? What do you mean list? I'm hurting now. Well, sorry. We don't have enough of this service to go around, and it'll be a couple months till we get around to your turn. Egad. Can you imagine some people, they're hurting big time, maybe their life's in jeopardy, maybe pulling out some bucks for a bribe? Yeah. And then, assuming you can't do that, or, if you're not willing to, or you have the money to pay the bribe, or to travel to some country where there is no waiting line. I wonder why so many people come to the U.S. for health care. Is it because our health care is so great? It's pretty good. But it's because they don't have to wait in line here as much, at least not till recently, where we've changed our health care system, and that'll increase the amount of waiting time. So finally, your turn comes up a few 2 or 3 or 4 months down the road. Well, you didn't just stay constant. Your health probably deteriorated some during the time you were waiting. Okay, so shortages in healthcare and other areas, but it's pretty obvious in healthcare, diminish the usefulness of the service. Its value to you is less than it had been before because it won't do you as much good. You may be dead, right? You won't do you any good maybe. If you died while waiting, that happens. Okay, so 2 effects. Shortages reduce quality, and shortages reduce usefulness of goods to people, in many cases, not always. Okay, waiting for something has a time cost, of course, especially if you have to spend actual time standing in line rather than just being on a list and having to wait for your turn. But it typically diminishes the usefulness of the service, at least in some cases. Okay, so the quality takes a hit, and also the usefulness of it does. Okay, so talked about the dead weight loss. See, is it up there on the other slide? Yeah, there. Yeah. No, the dead weight loss isn't up on that graph, but it is in mine. Okay, so let's put it here again. Okay, using my numbers, that's the lost gains from trade, dead weight loss, from either a $52 price floor or a $30 price ceiling. By the way, remember, if we switch the words, then there's no effect. Which words, you say? What if there's a $52 price ceiling? No effect. What if there's a $30 price floor? No effect. See, just switched a couple words. Got to think. Okay, remember that. I'll show the top hat question here in a minute, where we nailed that down at the end of last time, but we need to do that again. You can't assume a price control is effective automatically. You have to compare it to the market equilibrium. Now, it's true that in some cases a price floor being on the low side, a price ceiling being on the high side might not matter immediately, but it can cap producers' expectations of higher prices and affect their behavior that way. But we won't get it. That's a more advanced topic. For our purposes, for the moment, a low price floor or a high price ceiling has no effect. But just park in the back of your mind that, yeah, it can have an effect sometimes anyway. Okay, and this last point here, but it is illegal for the price to rise. Well, all right, it's illegal for it to rise. That doesn't mean it's not gonna anyway, right? That's the nature of black markets. Black market means it's an illegal market, but they're out there. Healthcare example again, the UK, Britain, England, has a very robust black market in healthcare, because some people don't have the time to wait, and they don't want to wait, it hurts, and plus they're worried about the usefulness of the service declining with the decline in their health. So the Prime Minister has used the healthcare on the black market to avoid the waiting time or the political stigma of having said, hey, I'm Prime Minister, I don't need to wait in line behind everybody else. Well, why do you deserve special treatment? Well, I'm the Prime Minister, and well, maybe, that ought to deserve special treatment, but it looks bad politically. So it's easier just to hide in the black market and get your service taken care of right away and not to pay out of pocket for it. Okay, so illegal doesn't mean not available, not going to happen. It means that you have to jeopardize your freedom to consume a service sooner rather than later. Okay, now here we go. Here's the slide that has the deadweight loss in it. The deadweight loss has two components, almost always. There's a loss to producers from not being able to sell something for more than opportunity cost, and there's a loss to buyers for not being able to purchase something below what it's worth to them. Okay, and again, there's the time value of wasted time there on the left. If you figure that, by the way, don't divide by 2, the wasted time value there, that's a square, right? The loss or gain doesn't diminish or grow with quantity like the deadweight loss, right? The deadweight loss, right, where it says Q supplied, okay, that's the largest lost gains from trade, right? Let's use my numbers again here. The 35th unit, okay, has this loss. So the 36th unit would claim much more additional gains from trade than the 43rd and the 44th unit. Okay, that's why it's a triangle. That's why we take base times height and then divide by 2. It's because the gains from trade are not constant. They diminish as we approach the efficient quantity. But that's not true for the time waste. And the time waste is a constant difference between what the price is, if you can find it, the controlled price, and what the willingness to pay is, or what the value of the good is, which is the, it says willingness to pay there. By the way, I'm careless sometimes. I use the abbreviation WTP, and I forget to define it, willingness to pay. Okay, like DWL, and I've used that so many times I often don't use the words, I just use DWL, deadweight loss, lost gains from trade. Right. Remember, this is about fishing for questions. So I'm feeling a little frustrated about the no hands up. I know this isn't perfectly clear. Talk. Think back to all the questions you missed on the test because you didn't ask a question about it when you had a chance, which is not just when it's first covered, but after that as well. And by the way, I didn't notice any issues posted online about the exam. So from that, I guess I'm going to assume that you've solved all those riddles yourself, and there weren't any worth your time to post online to signal to me to either respond there or review here in class. I'll allow a little more time for it. We'll spend some time on Tuesday if you want, but we need to start with posting it online. See, then I can come better prepared too. Then I don't have to have a spur-of-the-moment reaction to one of 50-something questions, which I might have to, well, let's see, which question was that? And yeah, how was that? See, give me a little advance warning of the ones you want me to go over. The final exam is mostly, it's stuff from the same test bank for sure, and it's a lot of the same questions re-asked with maybe some little tweaks to defeat memorization. So maybe that provides enough incentive to make sure you don't remake those same mistakes again. Review all of those and learn from your mistakes. Okay, price controls distort signals. What does that mean? That means it makes something look artificially expensive or cheap. So for example, a minimum wage as a price floor makes labor, unskilled labor, more expensive to hire than its true opportunity cost. Okay, that's what we mean by a distorted signal. So businesses will economize on something, purchase less of it, find substitutes for it, when it isn't as scarce as the price is making it seem. They're making uneconomical or inefficient substitutions because of the artificially higher price from a price floor like the minimum wage. Again, that doesn't mean the minimum wage is a bad idea. I'm just saying that's an efficiency part of it. Okay, talked to an economist a couple of weeks ago that said, yeah, those are all true, but those effects aren't very big, and a lot of people get a raise. So he thought the minimum wage, despite its inefficiencies, was a good policy. Other economists, I count myself among them, think, no, the efficiency losses aren't offset by any equity gains that I see out there. So intelligent people disagree on the issue. Okay, so the last point there, we have a misallocation of resources. As you know from our earlier discussion, in the case of a price floor, more resources are put into that market when there's already a surplus, too much. Hello? See, that's what happens when you distort signals. Okay, when you get away from freedom, deciding what the price should be and how much should trade, and have the political process say, no, freedom's not working. It's time to replace that with a different number to mandate a higher or lower price. Then you start getting, instead of just some inconvenience for the low-value buyers or the high opportunity cost sellers, then you get to start getting to some actually bizarre behavior. Okay, in the case of a price ceiling that's relevant, what do you get? You have not enough, yet you're chasing resources out of the market, right? That quality erosion thing. Right? And plus the waste of resources standing in line. Okay, so as a result, in controlled markets, goods and resources are misallocated. Okay, and also part of it, as this graph shows where it says least valued uses, hey, they're out there trying to buy the good. Right? Their willingness to pay might not be much, but maybe their time isn't very costly. And so much of this very scarce good, only Q supplied, is going to be available. Some of it will go to the buyers whose value is least. Now, there's some confusion here because you're going to say, well, Doc, what do you mean by value? Willingness to pay. That's the standard for value out there. Things are worth what somebody is willing to pay for them. But then you say, sure, some people are willing to pay more. They have more. They have more money. That's not fair, right? It's that, wait a minute now. Maybe not fair. Maybe there's some things people should be entitled to, okay, that they shouldn't have to earn the money to be able to have their economic vote for, right? Willingness to pay being just a function, or value just being a function of willingness and ability to pay. But hey, what's a synonym for income? Earnings. Right? So, yeah. Well, of course, not all income is earned. Maybe you inherited it, but that's a standard that we employ, is that your willingness to pay is based on your earnings. Okay, and so then that seems at least for some things to be the right standard. See, the thing about healthcare that we talked about is, that's widely rejected in that area. Okay, that your earnings should decide, and your willingness to pay on that basis should decide what kinds of healthcare services you get or not. Okay, in fact, we have a law on the books now that says you can't be turned away from the emergency room regardless of your income, regardless of your ability to pay. Clearly an inefficient thing, right? People clog up the emergency room with relatively minor problems while other people with a higher willingness to pay have to stand in line behind them. Okay, clearly inefficient. Does that mean wrong? No. Intelligent people will disagree on whether that means wrong, but it is provably inefficient. Okay, math and graphs and deadweight losses and all of that stuff. We can prove efficiency and inefficiency. We can't prove right and wrong unless efficiency is the only thing that you care about or the only thing going on, the only thing that we can that's affected by the choice under consideration. Back in 1971, President Nixon was trying to fight inflation, and I guess he didn't have enough cooperation from whoever the head of the Federal Reserve was. Money supply was growing too fast. That's most of the reason for inflation. You know that if you've taken macro. Too much money chasing too few goods is the reason for inflation. But President Nixon at the time decided that one of the ways he was going to go after inflation was just by making it illegal. Yeah. Well, if only it was so easy to do most things, right? And we don't like the price of this going up, or we don't like this, we'll just make it illegal. Well, anyway, he froze prices. But at least he did it at the current market level, rather than saying, hey, they're too high. Why don't we freeze them at 10% or 15% or some percentage below where they already are? But nevertheless, because the price system is what allocates goods and services and resources, demand and supply is constantly shifting, as we showed, especially in the price system chapter. There were increasingly shortages of things where demand was increasing faster in some areas, especially with the money supply still growing too fast. The number of shortages increased steadily. And like the second point here, why were there shortages in some places than others? Well, because demand increases faster in some places than others. So the price at which we froze, the price level that preceded the price controls, where the prices were frozen at, were not high enough to keep quantity demanded and quantity supplied the same. Now, what if they'd been set above market prices? Sort of irrelevant, right? Not effective. Be sort of prices are going up too high and we want to make sure they don't go above a certain level. They wouldn't have had much of any effect. For a while at least, until some prices rose to the higher levels. We've talked about rent controls a little bit already. Again, this is another one of those really good examples in the bizarre series of things that can happen if you set a maximum on the price of something. Of course, the immediate effect is shortages. Okay, the long-run effect is even bigger shortages. Why is that? Well, because the lower price takes a lot of the profit out of owning an apartment building. Okay, so what do? You say, the price of offices is looking pretty good. I'll just convert these apartments to offices. Oh, wow. Well, that further reduces the supply of apartments. Right? There are production substitutes for the things usually with the capped prices, and so then there's an increase in the production of those and less production of the things where the price ceiling is in effect. So let's see. People realize that, including legislators, and they say, okay, all right, maybe the prices are set too low and we have these problems of shortages and mafioso beating up people remember that story from last time? Being available to beat up people so that other people waiting for apartments can get in them, and weird thing, black markets happen. So why don't we do this, says the legislator. Why don't we make it okay to raise the price, the rent, after the current tenant leaves? Okay, we want to make sure the current tenant can stay in the apartment. Maybe they can't afford to pay more. But if they leave, then we'll allow the price to go up. Hello? What have we just created an incentive to do? Make it very unpleasant to live in that apartment. Okay, because the landlord now has a incentive. They can charge a higher rent to the next tenant. Oh, there's a broken pipe in your apartment. Oh, darn, I'm very busy. I'm going to be out of town next week. The landlord, I don't think I can get to it. Meanwhile, you have this big plumbing problem. So what do you have to do to get your plumbing problem fixed? What do you do now if you have a plumbing problem? Hello, is anybody? You call the plumber, right? Now, usually if you're renting an apartment, you don't have to do that, do you? But unless you want to sit there in a flood, okay, or maybe it's just a dripping faucet, but it ding, 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 it makes it kind of hard to sleep. You're going to pay the plumber yourself. What does that accomplish? What is the result of that? It's more costly to rent the apartment than you thought it would be. Oh, the price went up. I'll be darned. I don't know how that happens. If there's a shortage, there will be ways for the price to go up. There's the harassment. If the landlord says, I can charge the next tenant more. Now, what's another way that the landlords figured a way to sort of dodge some of these restrictions? They charged key money. In other words, the apartment max that I can charge is, say, $500 a month. But they didn't close the loophole. I can't charge you more than $500 a month, but there's a fixed payment to get the key, to get into the apartment in the first place. You see that around here some. To begin with, not that, but the opposite. First month rent free, right, or something like that. They want to get you in there, right, get you locked in there to where it's a pain to move, and so you'll pay the rent. Okay, well, you can do the opposite, too, in a rent-controlled situation. Charge what's called key money. Now, wait a minute. So every time there's a new tenant, you charge the key money, a lot of money, usually hundreds of dollars, maybe thousands. What incentive have we created? Again, harass the heck out of the current tenant. Basically, the day after they pay the key money, it starts getting noisy and in other nasty ways. Because what happens? If the tenant leaves, the next person can be charged the key money. So you charge the key money more often, more turnover there is. So there's an incentive for turnover. See, now does that mean that these legislators were stupid or mean or evil and they wanted tenants to be harassed? No, they just didn't do their basic economics. They didn't trace through the effects, the incentives that result when you create restrictions and laws and penalties and whatever, rules that preclude some things and mandate other things. But it's not all that hard to figure out what would happen. Back in the 1930s, there was a big deal about the volatility of farm prices. Now, as you know, an equilibrium price must be affordable to the vast majority and profitable to the vast majority of producers. It wouldn't be the equilibrium price, but the claim there was that the small family farmers weren't able to keep up with the ups and downs in these prices. The price volatility was a big problem. So the government folks said, okay, all right, we got the message. Okay, we're going to set a price floor above where the price usually is. Okay, but in some years, it falls down to that level. And at that level, we, taxpayers, will buy up this crop to make sure the price doesn't go any lower. Okay, so at prices that are relatively low by historical standards, we, the taxpayers, under the laws that were proposed and passed at the time, the taxpayers have to buy up this crop. Okay, it's called a price support to keep the price from falling any lower than it maybe otherwise would. And then, see, this can make good, think about this, as the campaign season is coming up, right? Use your economics to evaluate the sensibility of the arguments and promises the politicians are making. Okay, so they said, okay, we'll buy this stuff when the price falls to a relatively low level. And then when it's, the prices are volatile, that's the whole reason for the law. And when it rises to a relatively high level, that will sell it off. Okay, again, the we is the people, the government. We will sell off that stuff. We'll make money doing this. We will become government speculators, buying when it's cheap to keep the price from going any lower, selling when it's expensive, and that'll pay for the program, maybe more than pay for the program. Did it? No. Why not? What did we change in the way of incentives through that price floor that caused the program not to function as promised? Anybody have a clue or a thought? Pretend you're a farmer. Put yourself in those shoes. You want to be one of the 1/3 1/5 or 1/3 of the population that goes into government, that's what you better start doing, is figuring out these sorts of things, is putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, a lot of somebody else's shoes, to figure out whether the laws and proposals that you're considering are sensible or nutty. Okay, so put yourself in the farmer's shoes. You've got all these different crops you could produce. Now one of them, the government set a price floor on it, a floor below what the equilibrium usually is. Okay, a price that usually isn't reached all that often, but occasionally. Okay, so a farmer with choices. How does this change the choice-making environment for the farmer? The fact that the price can't go any lower than a certain level for one or more of those crops now. What are they going to do? All else equal, the crop with that price support is safer now than it used to be, right? Right, because before the price could go down to here, in a really good year. That's the weird thing about farming, is good years aren't good. Right, a really good year like good weather, right? Big crop crash in the prices. Right, which means in a good year with those price supports, the government's going to have to buy a lot of stuff, right, to keep the price from going really low. But anyway, back to the story. So we've made the crop safer than it was before. All else equal, nothing else has changed other than that one's safer than before, so more of that crop will be produced than otherwise would have been. Yeah, exactly. And so the price that had been low and not reached very often is reached much more often than it had been before, because more of that crop is produced. And the price on the high side at which they were going to sell it off is hardly ever reached. Only in terrible, terrible years when there's mass floods is that high price reached at which they're pledged to sell off all the stuff they purchased at the low price and hopefully keep the taxpayers from having to cough up money to pay for the program. None of that's happened, right? We made the crop safer to produce, and so more of it was produced. And almost every year now, because agriculture has become more efficient through technology, almost every year the price is reached that had been historically low, that the government was only supposed to buy stuff at every so often. All about incentives that we need to be able to detect as part of price controls, either floors or ceilings. Okay, back to the rent control graph. Okay, the red line says, hey, the immediate shortage is not as bad as it's going to get. Yeah, there's going to be an immediate shortage, right? We press the price below the level set by the market. Some apartments will be taken off the market. And some additional people who said, at the market price, what it would be, no, I don't want to spend that much money to have my own apartment or to share it with only one roommate rather than 3 or 4. But at that rent control price, I want my own apartment at that price. Okay, so there's additional quantity demanded. And then, because of that lower price, by taking profit out of owning an apartment, there's a shift to the left of the supply line, and higher prices is a shift to the right in the long run, right? If we make it more profitable, more sellers will enter the market for that. Okay, so things are bad to begin with. And just, by the way, just kind of a personal story to illustrate that, saying how can we take apartments off the market? There they are, they're apartments. Well, a minute ago I gave they could be converted to other uses, but there are some apartments, some spaces that exist as apartments that are easily repurposed to other things rather than a giant apartment building. For example, I rent to a tenant a small garage apartment in my backyard. And so there's a privacy issue and a bunch of other issues. And, I think if the city were to come along and say, I can't charge as much as I do charge, not $1 less, but maybe $100 less, I think maybe that area would be better used for a play area for my kids. Okay? And I wouldn't have to keep, because it's old, and so I spend a lot of money on maintenance on it and such. At a much lower price than I can charge now, I'm not sure it would be worth it for me to rent it out. Okay? So, am I the only person in a situation like that? What does that make me? It makes me a marginal seller. marginal seller, one that's just barely in the market at the current price. See, those are the folks, the difference between the market equilibrium quantity, where the lines intersect, and the quantity supplied in the short run. Those are the folks that exit the market, the marginal sellers, those for whom the current price is just barely adequate to keep them as a seller. And if the price is mandated to be lower, they say, I'm out of here. And not necessarily to repurpose the space to something else that they sell, like for an office, but just to take it off the market and use it privately or not use it at all. In the case of the apartment, maybe the maintenance costs on it are so high that at any lower price it's not worth renting out. Okay? So there's an immediate effect, Q supplied short run, and then there's a longer run effect when the reduced maintenance, the quality erosion, sometimes means the destruction of the property, sometimes by design, right? If the property falls apart, then they may be allowed under city rules to tear it down and build something else on the property. But maybe there are restrictions that say that you can't demolish your apartment just because you're not making enough money on it. Well, maybe you let it fall apart on its own, then you can. Okay? So the shortage is bad immediately, and it gets worse in the long run with the repurposing of some of the space and the self-destruction because of reduced quality, reduced maintenance. See, if you're that landlord that's got more than enough tenants waiting in line for apartments, you don't have to do much maintenance to make sure that apartment rents to somebody at the highest price you can charge. See, that's the nice thing about the market price is the landlord says, yeah, I want to be able to charge $500 for this apartment. If I don't keep it up, I can't rent it for more than $450 a month. Okay, so then they work harder to keep it up and to keep it quiet and safe and all those other things that allow them to charge more than they otherwise would. Here's some data to back up the notion that rent controls matter. Notice the lower line, the steep decline in it. That's even before the rent controls went into effect. See, markets are really efficient about things. They predict things. People hedge their bets in advance. They say, for example, let's say somebody proposes a rent control, but it just has zero chance of passage. The landlords will say, that's not going anywhere, and that won't affect them. But if they read the news and, it's the city council debating it, and at least half the members of the city council are in favor, and a couple of other members are sort of wavering and might vote for it, they're thinking, oh boy, pretty soon I might be able to not charge nearly as much as I can charge now. And so, boom, down it goes in terms of plans to build new apartment units. I'm somewhat surprised that the other one isn't increasing, but at least it's flat, the non-controlled ones, because those are consumption substitutes, right? If you can't get into a rent-controlled apartment because there's a shortage, because the quantity actually available to rent is lower than it was before, you got to live somewhere, right? And so you're pushed into the market where the rent controls don't apply. And typically that drives up the price, and normally that would increase the housing starts there. Perhaps in this particular example, it says Ontario, Canada, there was probably some concern that the rent controls would be extended to the rest of the market if prices rose there. I don't know. So markets are efficient even before changes actually occur. Sometimes they occur in the market, or before laws are actually passed that would have an impact. They have some of the impact right away in anticipation of the effects. Okay, we went over this one already. What if you got a dripping faucet and the landlord doesn't care because maybe there's key money, maybe they can raise the rent on the next tenant, or they just don't care because they don't have to because somebody else would gladly to take the apartment with dripping faucet and all, and so it's just work from their perspective for no marginal benefit to them at all. So what do? You got to call the plumber yourself. Well, yeah, the rent just went up, didn't it? Because normally you wouldn't have to do that. Okay, so the rent will go up. The cost of being in the apartment will go up, just not necessarily through your monthly check for the apartment. Right? It'll become a less desirable apartment. Quality will erode. Maybe really less desirable given those incentives to charge the key money or to raise the rent on future tenants. But only maybe less desirable because maintenance isn't very fast or very effective. It's an interesting question there, the second one. How would you go about addressing the political problem of trying to pass a law that would cause some folks' rents to rise? Now, the rest of the city, is that a big deal to them? Maybe, maybe they've been looking for an apartment and they can't find one. So, yeah, let's get rid of those rent controls. But see, this identifies a fundamental problem in politics. Concentrated benefits or losses weigh a lot more on political decisions than the dispersed opposite of benefits or costs. I'll give you an example here. Eliminating, repealing the rent control. Let me reword that because that was pretty awkward. Repealing the rent control would impose higher costs, but much higher costs on a relatively few people. They may change their vote based on that one issue alone. The benefits are not, the benefits of eliminating the rent control are citywide. Anybody that will eventually be a possible tenant, and maybe someone that right now is already looking, is going to say, well, that's a good idea, but they don't, it's okay, I'm going to have to pay more if I find an apartment, but at least maybe I'll be able to find one. So they're thinking, okay, all right, maybe, and is that going to be enough maybe to change, is that going to be enough for them to change who they'd vote for? Probably not. Okay, so rent controls create concentrated benefits and dispersed and hidden costs, which is why they are enacted into law in some cases. Eliminating rent controls has concentrated costs and dispersed and not easily seen benefits. So the politics of that is usually that where things are concentrated, that's where the votes are to be gained or lost. And so that's why we have a lot of these bad ideas created into law to begin with, and then it's very difficult to get rid of them. What you might have to do in this case to eliminate the rent control ordinance is to bribe the existing tenants in the rent-controlled apartments, literally, through government money, legally bribe them to accept the change in policy. Another example from New York City, like the Pecani commercial. Yeah, another example from New York City is those cab medallions. Those are in effect permits to operate a cab in New York City. The last time I checked, which admittedly was a few years ago, you could sell one of them. You're allowed to sell them, and you can't operate a cab legally without one. $100,000 is what one of those is worth. Yeah. So, what if you allow Uber into the market? You all know what Uber is, the ride-sharing thing. That reduces the demand for cabs, right? Now, you think the cabbies are a little bit hopping mad? I would be if I were one. I just paid somebody $100,000 for one of these medallions, a permit to operate a cab. It's like, wait a minute, I thought this was was something you had to buy yourself into, and now, you politicians are allowing these people to pick up folks, ride sharing through Uber. Yeah. So, if you wanted to legalize operating a cab without a license, you'd make the existing cabbies hopping mad probably because they've got this $100,000 or whatever it's worth now, that was a few years ago, piece of metal, some equivalent of a piece of paper that they had to buy to get in. So to eliminate that, to eliminate their opposition to a change in the law, you probably have to buy their medallions from them. Otherwise, and maybe you can prevail politically over their opposition, but often the concentrated benefit versus dispersed cost thing makes it difficult to do that. The politicians respond to votes. That's why we configure the system. Okay? So that isn't bad per se, but often it causes bad things to be enacted into law or bad things to be kept and not repealed. Forgive me for using the term bad, because what we are discussing here is efficiency. Inefficient laws, which doesn't necessarily make them bad. Okay? One bad aspect, efficiency, all else equal, is a good thing, but bad and inefficient are not necessarily the same thing. Okay. An alternative to capitalism that's often been employed, which we've talked about a little bit under the price system chapter, is a command economy. And because there are gazillions of goods and services, and there are 6 supply shifters and 6 demand shifters for each one, The commanders are unable to choose, in most cases, prices that will currently or consistently avoid shortages and surpluses. So in countries like the former Soviet Union and China when it was more communist than it is now, and currently still in Cuba and North Korea, where they still operate under a command economy, there are massive shortages and occasional surpluses because they get the price wrong. Yeah, things aren't free there. You have to pay for things. But the prices are not set by markets. They're set by the government. And because of shifters, even if they had the price right to clear the market to avoid shortages and surpluses right away, eventually the price would be wrong because of these shifts in supply and demand, and then there would be the shortages and surpluses, mostly shortages because politically it's more politically correct to set a low price than a high price, even if it does impose long wait times on some folks, some for absolutely nothing when they get in the front of the line finally and there's nothing left for them to buy. And so because with shortages, there's going to be competition, intense competition to buy things that are valued much more highly than what the opportunity cost is. There will be, as it says up there, corrupt practices, to say the least, in order to be one of the lucky ones. Who was a big deal in the former Soviet Union. To have access to goods and services, to not have to stand in line waiting for them. Interesting slide here where somebody that moved to America still acted like they were in the Soviet Union to some extent. When they were able to buy things, they didn't assume that they would continue to have access to things, and so when they had access to buy stuff, they hoarded it. They bought tons and tons of it so that they wouldn't have to wait in line as they had been accustomed to waiting for stuff in the future. But occasionally, as it says on the slide there were surpluses. There would be just piles and piles of stuff because for whatever reason they'd set the price a little bit too high. And so obviously that's wasteful to make stuff for which there are no customers. Okay, a price ceiling, we're summarizing here, is a maximum price. Keep that in mind, but make sure that you assess first whether it's a relevant price ceiling. I'm going to do some top hat questions to finish off the day to nail that down. They create shortages, they reduce the quality of products, they waste resources, especially in the form of waiting time, and plus the goods are not as useful in many cases once they are finally acquired, the healthcare example. There is a deadweight loss because we don't produce as much as we should based on opportunity cost and value. And those first four things are already about misallocation of resources. But on top of that, when we don't have enough, we are chasing resources out of markets, right? With the price ceiling, there's shortages, not enough. Yet quality erodes and resources are exiting the market. And in the case of the price floors, we encourage competition for the limited number of people willing to buy at the artificially high price, which yields quality enhancements that cost more than they're worth to the buyer. And so that's another misallocation of resources above and beyond the time wasted in line and changes in quality and so on. Okay, so there's nothing on here that we didn't already discuss. Fishing for questions as always. What price controls always do is they reduce the amount actually purchased. Okay, again, if they're relevant, that is effective. Floors above, ceilings below the market equilibrium price. Now again, that doesn't make them bad. Maybe there's a reason, equity reasons that offset the efficiency losses, but definitely there are efficiency losses from price controls. Freedom, okay, the market equilibrium price that results from the free interplay of choices whether to buy something or not, or choices whether to produce something or not, produces the most efficient outcome, assuming there's enough competition and there are no spillovers, okay, which is an assumption two assumptions that are widely held. What does spillovers mean? Well, the market equilibrium price for, say, coal may not be efficient, may not produce sufficient results because there are spillovers that result from burning coal. And that unintended side effects fall on third parties. A later chapter, 2 later, I think, we'll address that issue. So, if all the benefits go to buyers and all the costs are imposed on sellers, as they almost always are, no spillovers, and the markets are competitive, the result of freedom is the most efficient, though not necessarily because of being the most efficient, the best policy. Okay, let's move on to the top hat questions. Before we do that, let's go ahead and take attendance. So pull out your devices. And there we go. All right, we seem to be stuck, so we'll call it a morning on that. And let's move on to these questions here to see how well you absorbed some of these. Now, as you can see, maybe it's easy to see. It says PCQ1 through PCQ6. 6 top hat questions are not going to reflect the whole chapter. That's all we have time for in class is 6 to 10 questions. Okay, but they're often reflective of some of the more difficult concepts. So make sure you don't look at just these. Make sure you look at more than this, your learning curve and your homework and other things. But definitely do look at these because I think some of you struggled on the last test because you didn't. All right, I'm going to re-ask this one. For some of you, this is a gimme because you were here last time and you know what the answer to this one already is. But some of you weren't. And maybe you need another refresher, and it's an excuse for me to talk about it again. I don't think I did transfer this one to your Top Hat account last time. If I didn't, tell me, and I will. Now, the others I didn't ask yet, so those are the next ones will be new. All right, so most of you were here, I guess, from last time, so we'll disable. All right, let's see how much was retained. Oh, wow, still a bunch. Okay, now, come on, the 14 of you that says a shortage, you got to speak up. Okay, maybe you weren't here last time, and so that's maybe why this trick question tripped you up. Okay, yeah, it's sort of a trick question. And not if you read it carefully and think about it, but because we were looking at, during the class at just effective price controls, the fact that this was not effective maybe tripped you. But if you were here last time and you answered this one wrong again on purpose, we need to talk. You need to fess up. What is it I need to say or explain or re-word or something to get this point across? And not just the people that answered a shortage of concrete, but all of you that didn't answer no change. Let me go back to the question here. Okay, so a price floor at $9. Okay, so there's your $9. P with the little quotes next to it. P double prime, I call it. Now, yeah, I know. We talked about numbers in class here, and yeah, it's below the equilibrium, and yeah, okay, so should create a shortage, right? You see, we're identifying the memorization problem, the failure to process rather than just recall. Okay, for some of you, the ones that answered that one wrong, those of you who should fess up. That was huge in my other class yesterday. Some people started fessing up. Doc, I answered this one wrong, and here's why. Oh, that was huge. Because then I was able to get to the root of some of the reasons for it. Something about the rain today. I was like, everybody, almost everybody hardly ever asks questions. But now it's everybody's not asking questions today. Maybe that's what it is. The atmospheric pressure is low or something with the rain coming in. All right, anyway, so there's the 9. So you're tempted to say, okay, Quantity demanded is 135, quantity supplied is 45. Okay, so shortage of 90, yeah, duh. No. Price floor. The price can't go any lower than 9. Well, the price won't go any lower than 12 in a free market. So setting a floor at $9 isn't going to change the price from being $12. Now, if there's a price ceiling at 9, yeah, now we're talking. Now we're talking there's a shortage of 90, 135 minus 45. Okay, so this question asked twice, once at the end of last time and now today, is a reminder not to get this one wrong on the homework and on the exam. Always, always, always first make sure that the alleged price control is an actual price control. In other words, actually changes the price from what the market price would otherwise be. A $9 floor is low and therefore will not change the price, cause the price to be different than the $12 equilibrium price that the market would set in this case. Now, if I were to ask this on the test, I might say just change the word floor to ceiling. See, and then the answer is the 90 shortage. One word change in the question and now the answer is different. Again, assaulting those who believe that academia is about memorizing something you don't understand, which many of you are clinging to because that's what you're used to and you've always done and it's always worked, and you're an A student because that's what you've always done and it's always worked. Well, worked at what? Yeah, getting a grade. Well, that's not the main reason to be here. Yeah, we do have to assign grades, but they should stand for more than your ability to memorize something. Okay, yes. I think, is that the first question today? Oh, cool. Appreciate that. Thanks. There would be a shortage of 90 tons per day. Yeah, because see, if it was a price ceiling, not a floor, then we would be disallowing the price to rise higher than 9. See, at that price of 9, the price wants to go up because there's a lot more customers than there is product to provide them, and the sellers, when they're free to raise prices, are quite eager to do so. They're not the least bit hesitant to raise prices when they can sell all of what they have to sell at the higher price or even more, right? In this case, if the price were allowed to rise above the $9, they would be able to sell more than they currently now are selling it at 9. Now, of course, they could sell more at 9 than they are, the 45. But given opportunity cost, they're not going to make more than that many. Okay, quality erosion. See, this could be an all of the above question too. See, if the price ceiling at 9, then there would be quality erosion of the good. And I don't know, is concrete something for which usefulness would decline, having to wait for a while to get it? I don't know. Probably the same concrete. Probably wouldn't be degraded in value by having to wait for it. But the quality of it would probably be lower. Some of the ingredients wouldn't be as carefully mixed as they otherwise would be, because as long as the concrete sort of congeals into something pretty hard, for most uses, the buyers are still going to buy it. More Q&A to seek clarification of those things that are not clear by my first best effort at it. All right, moving on to I guess we'll get to chapter 9 first thing next time. The rest of the top hat questions will probably consume the rest of the period. Look at that. I didn't even anticipation. Right? Here is a question. Now it is a ceiling. See, so you've done your due diligence. You said, okay, it's a ceiling. It doesn't matter unless it's below the equilibrium. $9 is below the equilibrium. So which one of these effects, if any, will occur? All right, there's a sudden surge. All right, well, that's good enough. All right, there you go. Quality erosion Yes, because of the shortage, which is answer D. Okay, the ceiling, the $9 ceiling is below where the price would normally establish itself through market forces. Therefore, it is an effective ceiling as opposed to $9 floor. As a floor is an ineffective floor, but as a ceiling, $9 is effective, which doesn't mean good, means it matters, which could mean good, depending on the policy objectives and whether the objectives offset the efficiency losses. Okay, and because of the surplus customers, see, that's what a shortage means. Think of a shortage as surplus customers. If you have customers waiting to replace existing customers, then you don't have to treat the existing customers as well. And one of the ways to make more money is to not put as much stuff into the product as you had been. Okay, so that's the basis of the quality erosion. Okay, make sure when you study you get to duh, right? Why? Why is the right answer the right answer? Yes, Tyler. Yes. If it had been I already switched to the next one. Let's go back to that one. Okay, so if this had said a price floor, but at something above 12, like at 16, that might be one of the other questions. But so let's wait for that. If it isn't one of the other questions, we'll come back to this one. I went through them, but I can't remember if that's one of the other questions. So let's go to the third one. Okay, so there. Yeah, we're almost out of time, so I might go back to that one in a minute. Okay, so we do our due diligence. A $9 ceiling does matter, right? It's below the equilibrium. What does it cause? All right, so there's a shortage of 90. Okay, but that's not one of the things you have as a choice here. But one of the choices that's the choice that's correct is, the quantity actually purchased is diminished by the fact that there's less for folks to buy, and you can't buy it unless it exists. So at $9 going here to 45, that's the quantity supplied. Yes, the customers are ready, willing, and able to, well, at least from their perspective, able in terms of the money, they have the money to buy 135 of them, but there's only 45 of them for them to buy, so that's the amount actually purchased. And since we're running short on time, I will answer Tyler's question on this one before we finish up, and we'll do the rest of these next time. All right, so your question was, suppose we have a situation with this graph of a price floor at $16. Okay, that's precluding it from falling to the $12 price that would naturally go to. And so you'd have a surplus of 105 and some of those wasteful quality enhancements. So I think if we look at the choices, that would mean that A and C are correct. Okay, so is that was your question? Okay, there you go. All right, I think we all need some coffee or something today. Well, just a little less, I don't know, a little more poker face looking than usual out there. You see, I almost put the chalk back. I said, no, that's the commons. I'll just lose that piece of chalk.